Hello, I'm Mike Lieber. I'm a partner in the Chicago office of Ice Miller. I'd like to talk to you today about 3D printing. 3D printing is not a brand new technology, but it's a burgeoning one. Unlike what is often called subtractive manufacturing, 3D printing or additive manufacturing essentially involves a machine that lays down very high temperature plastic or metal or even biologic materials to create a new object. With traditional or subtractive manufacturing, we're often talking about a block of metal, a block of plastic, a block of some other material where portions are carved away, shaved away, cut away, and you have the final product there. With 3D printing, we're essentially printing very fine layers on top of each other to create new designs. Now, with 3D printing, there are a lot of rewards, but there are also some risks. I wanted to talk to you about that today because the risks kind of go throughout the industry, from the funding of an industry to intellectual property matters facing 3D printers, to litigation matters, to insurance, to labor and employment issues for those who are involved in 3D printing manufacturing. But one of the great things about 3D printing manufacturing is many new things are possible that used to not be possible with traditional or subtractive manufacturing. For example, we can create new shapes, designs, and structures, new geometries that are really exciting, and I'll show you a couple of images in a moment on that point. We can launch products faster because instead of spending 6 or 8 weeks creating an initial mold to test out a product, we can now use computer-aided design and have a CAD software designer create the design and a machine, a 3D printing machine, print that new design overnight. So literally, we can go in 24 hours from idea to design to an actual prototype. And last, it allows us to make high-value, low-volume products that are much more easily made with 3D printing rather than traditional manufacturing. We see 3D printing now in the aviation world. For example, this little nozzle is found on this enormous General Electric MaxJet engine. That nozzle used to be created with traditional or subtractive manufacturing. It was about 20 pieces welded together, very time-consuming, but now with 3D printing, a very high-tech 3D printer can actually lay down layer after layer of composite metal materials to form this in one piece, which makes it sturdier, it makes it cheaper, less waste, and also much less weight. Each of those nozzles weighs about 1 pound less than the nozzles made with traditional manufacturing. And they're 38 per engine, so on a 2-engine plane, we're talking about a reduction of almost 80 pounds of weight. And that's really the gold standard when it comes to aviation design. Not only in aviation do we see 3D printing, we're also seeing it in the automotive industry. For example, now car companies are 3D printing rather than using clay to create entire molded cars that can be tested in wind tunnels. We see tinkerers, people who, like Jay Leno, for example, have hundreds of cars, and many of these cars are 30, 50, 80 years old, and they can't simply go to the auto parts store and buy a replacement for a 1930-something Duesenberg. So what they do is they design, create, and manufacture a 3D printed replacement part. We see now 3D printed prototypes for full engine blocks. We also see 3D printing now in life sciences, some really neat, fascinating things for people who have skull surgery and have to have a portion of their skull removed. We can now 3D print a part that fits perfectly to that person's contours of their head. We also see it in dental areas, and now certainly in the next few years, we are actually going to see portions of or entire organs that are, believe it or not, being printed with 3D printing machines. 3D printing could very well be the wave of the future, offering tremendous opportunities to companies, manufacturing companies here in Illinois. So the next question is, if you're thinking about getting started, how do I fund this? There are many different ways to fund a 3D printing manufacturing process, but you should know that to use one of the big, highest tech 3D printing machines, those printing machines are not cheap. They cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, easily $500,000 for some of the most highest tech ones that you would need for some of these things that you are going to be manufacturing. So what you want to do is you want to consider how to fund this. You might consider forming a joint venture, either with some kind of venture fund, with a partner that is in your industry, or even a joint venture with one of the companies that makes these 3D printing machines. Why is a joint venture a possibility, and an attractive one at that? Well, it's less capital intensive for you. If you've got somebody splitting the cost with you, that's cheaper for you. It allows you to share the risks in case the venture does not go as planned. It also allows you to get going quicker, because rather than spending your time raising money, you can spend your time actually manufacturing what you'd like to manufacture. In addition to considering a joint venture and other types of corporate entities to pursue your 3D printing process, you can also look into government programs and grants, because there are right now both local, state, and federal opportunities to get exciting and quite lucrative grants. The government wants to focus on this technology. It wants to build it out, particularly in the Midwest. So make sure that you take a look at the many options that there are out there. You should look at these early and often. Definitely investigate them early, because if you get too far down the path, some of these might be closed off to you. Next, if you do pursue 3D printing, after you've figured out how to formalize your venture, whether it's a joint venture, a solo venture, after you've investigated the government grants, you want to make sure that you are protecting your intellectual property. And that's trademarks, patents, and copyrights. Why do we want to use IP to protect ourselves? Well, for example, if you're creating a product that could be easily reverse engineered, there are companies ready and willing and waiting in foreign countries to essentially scan your 3D printed product, reverse engineer it, put it into a CAD design, and start printing the identical object tomorrow. So you want to make sure that you protect yourself, both not only in the United States, but with patents and other IP protections around the world. This is important because it allows you to develop your assets. If you have protected yourself with these IP tools, you can point to a greater value that your company adds, particularly if you're looking for investors. It does attract investors if they know that you own the rights to what you're making. It also allows you to more easily market, because this way you can go out there, market your products without fear that somebody is going to steal them. And it discourages competition, which obviously in a competitive world, if you can be the sole owner and manufacturer of that object, that's going to be quite beneficial. So now that we've talked about how to organize your company, how to try to capture grants, and also how to protect yourself with IP tools, next we have to talk about litigation issues. Unfortunately, litigation is a part of this industry, and often you're going to face two different types of litigation concerns. The first is, again, intellectual property litigation, and the second are product liability claims. I'm not going to take too much time talking about intellectual property concerns, but know this: if you have protected yourself, it allows you to use litigation offensively to make sure that others can't create the products that you now own the rights to. When it comes to product liability claims, there are some major concerns, because when you are working in 3D printing, you're going to be working with raw materials companies that manufacture the objects that you are going to be using to create your 3D printed pieces, whether that's plastics, metal, or some kind of biologic material. You're also going to be working with distributors and end users. So you want to protect yourself. You want to be aware of who is creating your software if you're outsourcing that. You want to make sure that the materials you're getting are made to the specifications that you've required. You want to make sure that the 3D printing machine that you're using is up to the task. And last, you're going to want to make sure that you, the manufacturer, are manufacturing your product such that it meets the specifications that it needs to meet. So ultimately, you want to protect yourself. You want to protect yourself from litigation by contracting with upfront contracts for the software design, upfront contracts with your materials providers, where it specifies exactly what you're going to be provided and how that is going to be used in the manufacturing process. You want to protect yourself with contracts, hard-hitting, tightly written contracts with the 3D printing machine companies that protect you. And finally, if you can, protect yourself with contracts with the end user. Ultimately, if there is litigation, it's much like a game of musical chairs, and you want to make sure that there is a chair for you if a lawsuit occurs. I want to talk to you about two last things. First of all, finding your labor force. As I mentioned at the outset, this is a booming industry. In the last year, the growth in 3D printing and the growth in demand for 3D printing employees has grown by 100%. It's grown by 1,800% just in the last 4 years. What is now about a $5 billion industry is projected to be a $30 billion industry in 10 years. In other words, it's going to grow 5 or 6-fold in the next decade. So where do you find people with knowledge when it comes to running a 3D printing operation? Well, one of the best places is engineers who are coming out of undergrad right now. They're actually working on these things both here in Illinois and around the Midwest. You can also look to employees who are coming out of government-funded training programs that we have now here in Illinois. There are big ones in places like Ohio and Virginia and elsewhere. You can also look to overseas hires, because there are many people coming out of India and China particularly who have this background. But these are in-demand jobs, and finding a workforce who can do these things is not easy. It is a real challenge. But you can find these people if you look. Last, there may be union issues if you decide to shift from traditional or subtractive manufacturing to 3D printing or additive manufacturing. For example, if you are a union shop, you likely have a collective bargaining agreement that might have language in it in terms of how many people you have to employ in certain lines. Well, if you make a change and some of those lines no longer need 10 or 20 or 50 people, but a different type of skill set and only 3 or 4 or 5 people, you'd need to make sure that that squares with the language in your CBA. There might be management rights clauses that allow you to shift to new machinery without having to worry about the CBA language. There are seniority issues that you have to take into consideration if you do have to make cuts. Also, de-skilling can be an issue. Finally, health and safety issues can come into play, because with 3D printing machines, while there are often less physical risks to people versus a punch press with thousands of pounds of pressure that can injure them, there are fumes, there are dust and so forth from the powdered plastic or metal compounds that you're using to manufacture. These are all things to take into consideration. And if you do decide to pursue 3D printing manufacturing, I would recommend that you think long and hard about the risks and the rewards. There are a huge amount of rewards, but there are many risks. And depending on how you pursue it, you can protect yourself. One of the nice things about my firm, Ice Miller, is we're located here in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, are really the first firm in the country, the first law firm that has taken a holistic approach to the 3D printing industry. There are many firms that focus on just one issue, particularly intellectual property. We have taken an approach where we can offer services really kind of from cradle to grave when it comes to the 3D printing industry, from figuring out what kind of venture you want to form, to going after those government grants, to making sure that you've protected yourself with your IP rights, to making sure that you've limited your risk of litigation with hard-hitting contracts with suppliers, to the labor and employment and insurance issues. We're happy to help if you decide to pursue this. My contact information is on the screen. Feel free to give me a call. We'd love to help you. We'd love to help Illinois as it enters this exciting new realm of manufacturing. Thanks.